And Judge Boasberg disregarded that. Now, he did so at the invitation of Jack Smith. And I would say my Democrat colleague said, well, gosh, it's standard practice not to tell a judge the number you're subpoenaing. It is not standard practice to subpoena 20% of the Republicans in the Senate and the opposing party. And I'm confident my Democrat colleagues would be really pissed if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they...
Not clear,
Senator
so
Hirono
like
can respond, but
you
can. I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I am not interrupting you.
Hey everyone, Audrey here, and welcome back to Congress Lens. But I just watched that snippet of Senator Ted Cruz clashing with Senator Mazie Hirono during the hearing on holding rogue judges accountable, and I have to say, Cruz absolutely brought the facts and wasn't holding back. From what I saw, Cruz laid out the law clearly, exposed bias in how certain subpoenas were issued, and didn't let political theatrics distract from the real issue, accountability in the judiciary. And yes, he even called out a judge for reducing the sentence of someone who attempted to assassinate a Supreme Court justice. That's bold, that's factual, and honestly, it needed to be said. Before we dive into the full reaction and breakdown of the hearing, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, because here on Congress Lens, we're all about dissecting Congress hearings with clarity, accountability, and yes, opinions that matter. Alright, now let's get into the full video and see exactly how Cruz handled this entire exchange.
Great. Thank you, Chairman.
I would note that Professor Vladeck just said if a majority of this committee thinks that senators subject to subpoena should be notified that they could pass the law, well, magically we used a time machine to do that because Congress passed that into law in 2004. It is in the United States Code. It is black-lettered law, and Judge Boasberg disregarded that. Now, he did so at the invitation of Jack Smith. And I would say my Democrat colleague said, well, gosh, it's standard practice not to tell a judge the number you're subpoenaing. It is not standard practice to subpoena 20% of the Republicans in the Senate and the opposing party. And I'm confident my Democrat colleagues would be really pissed if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded with no basis in fact that the mere fact that they are Democrats demonstrates that they...
Clear,
Senator
so
Hirono
like
can respond, but
you
can. I'm happy to recognize you to respond, but I would ask you not to interrupt me because I am not interrupting you. I am certain my Democrat colleagues would be unhappy if the Trump DOJ... I'm asking you not to interrupt me, Senator Hirono. I did not interrupt you. I am speaking now, and I will recognize you to respond when I conclude in speaking. I am confident my Democrat colleagues would be deeply unhappy if the Trump DOJ subpoenaed 20% of the Democrats in the Senate and concluded the mere fact that they're Democrats means they are likely to be criminals. And I do want to note also, my prediction that no senator would mention Judge Boardman's name proved wrong with the penultimate Democrat speaker. Senator Hirono did mention her name, and 100% of what she said is the decision is on appeal. And I would welcome any of my Democrat colleagues to say that Judge Boardman's decision to deviate downwards by 22 years to reward an assassin, an attempted assassin, the Supreme Court justice, is anything but disgraceful, brazen, and encouraging more political assassinations. To defend it is anything other than a complete dereliction and abuse of her oath of office. Senator Hirono, you're welcome to respond.
You know, you talk about using facts. Well, the law that we refer to is not exactly clear on who bears the responsibility for asking who the heck's records are being subpoenaed. And by the way, if you want to blame somebody for the fact that 20% of Republican senators' records were subpoenaed, you can blame President Trump because he's the one who was calling all of you, or he had his minions calling all of you. So there you go. That's all I have to say.
You know, it is an amazing statement that Democrats now believe that the fact that a member of the Senate speaks to the President of the United States is sufficient to subpoena their phone records and presume they are criminals.
Why don't we move
because,
on?
Senator, you don't get to say move on because you don't have the gavel, but I will say this. Sad to say, well, perhaps if you hadn't presided over a disastrous economy and an open border and wars across the globe, you might still have the majority, but you don't. And my point is very simple. It is not a criminal conduct to speak with the President of the United States, and it is ludicrous to suggest that it is.
And of course, I didn't make that suggestion, so that's why I'm saying, can we move on with this?
And while we're doing that,
Unnecessary
since
hearing.
Professor Vladeck mentioned a letter from Director Conrad at the Administrative Office of the United States Courts, I'd offer that letter that he mentioned as an additional exhibit.
The letter will be admitted without objection.
Okay, now that we've watched the full hearing, let's break it down. First, I have to say, Ted Cruz was completely on point throughout this session. He opened by referencing the law from 2004, reminding everyone that senators are supposed to be notified if their records are subpoenaed. This isn't some gray area, it's black-letter law. And yet, Cruz points out that Judge Boardman completely ignored it. That's a huge deal, and Cruz didn't shy away from holding the judge accountable. Then there's the part where he highlights the apparent bias in targeting Republican senators. Cruz makes a valid point that if the same thing happened to Democrats, there would be outrage. He frames it logically. It's not about politics, it's about fairness and adherence to the law. And his patience in repeatedly asking Senator Hirono not to interrupt really shows professionalism. He's calm but firm, which is exactly what a senator should be in a heated hearing like this. Now, the Judge Boardman controversy. This is where Cruz really goes hard. Reducing the sentence of someone who attempted to assassinate a Supreme Court justice by 22 years? Cruz calls it disgraceful and says it encourages more political violence. I completely agree. He is highlighting a real threat to the integrity of the judiciary and public safety. That's not a partisan statement, that's common sense. Cruz also does something important. He clarifies that talking to the president is not a crime. In a climate where ordinary political communications are sometimes treated as criminal, Cruz reminds everyone that this is absurd and an overreach. And his jab at Democratic leadership, pointing to economic issues, border policies, and foreign conflicts. It's a reminder that political accountability doesn't stop at judges or subpoenas. It's about the overall governance record. Finally, Cruz shows he's thorough. He introduces the letter from Director Conrad as supporting evidence, which the committee accepts without objection. This isn't just rhetoric, he backs up his points with documentation. That's exactly how you hold people accountable and make a case in a hearing. My takeaway? Senator Ted Cruz was professional, factual, and unapologetically bold. He stood up for the law, fairness, and accountability while exposing bias in the process. For anyone watching who thinks senators just nod along in these hearings, this was a masterclass in speaking truth to power. If you agree that Cruz was right to call out these issues and hold the system accountable, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think about Judge Boardman's decision and the handling of these subpoenas. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss future breakdowns of these intense congressional hearings.